What if one of the greatest minds behind modern wireless communication was a woman Hollywood called the most beautiful in the world? What if the same actress who lit up the silver screen in the 1930s was also building frequency-hopping technology, the foundation of Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth? Hedy Lamarr wasn't just a star, she was a visionary inventor. A woman underestimated, overlooked, and uncredited. Not because she lacked genius, but because the world refused to see beyond her face. While others memorized scripts, she studied engineering. While nations went to war, she designed the tech that could protect them. But her mind, sharper than the systems around her, was dismissed, doubted, and silenced. Because it lived inside a woman who dared to be beautiful and brilliant. This episode is not just about Hedy Lamarr the actress. It's about Hedy Lamarr the rebel thinker, the woman who redefined what feminine genius could look like. You'll learn the secret inventions she developed while the world focused on her looks. How her engineering helped shape modern digital communication. The intellectual courage it took to work in two worlds at once. And what her story reveals about how society treats women who don't stay in their assigned lane. Because she wasn't just ahead of her time. She was building the future the rest of us would one day depend on. Chapter 1. The Early Mind, from Viennese curiosity to Hollywood glamour. Before the fame, before the inventions, before the world tried to reduce her to a face, Hedy Lamarr was Hedwig Kiesler, a girl in early 20th century Vienna, whose mind never stopped moving. Born in 1914 to a well-educated Jewish family, Hedy was surrounded by culture, philosophy, and possibility. She was reading engineering manuals before most girls her age were handed dolls. She wasn't playing house, she was asking how the electricity in the house worked. Her father, a banker, took long walks with her, explaining machines, dissecting engines, unraveling how the world was built. He didn't talk down to her. He spoke to her like she was an equal, and she rose to meet that level of thought, early, intuitively, and relentlessly. But even genius meets walls. By the time she was a teenager, Hedy's beauty became both asset and cage. Men noticed her, but not her mind. She studied acting at Max Reinhardt's famous school in Berlin, but it was in film, not in physics, where she was discovered. The industry saw her potential on the screen. Her ideas, her mind, her inner world, ignored. She starred in the 1933 film Ecstasy, which scandalized and sensationalized her across Europe. A young woman portrayed in a state of pleasure on screen, and just like that, her intellect was buried beneath a myth. She married Friedrich Mandl, an arms dealer, wealthy, powerful, and controlling. She became a trophy in a marble prison, kept close, yet intellectually dismissed. But what most people don't know is this. During those years, she was listening, learning, attending meetings alongside her husband with German scientists and military officials, absorbing information about radio frequencies, torpedoes, guided weapons. She wasn't idle. She was preparing. When she finally fled, disguised as a maid, escaping to London, then to Hollywood, the world thought she was running toward stardom. She was also running toward freedom. Hollywood embraced her as a symbol, the perfect face, the perfect accent, the European beauty reborn in American cinema. But they still weren't looking at her mind. They gave her contracts, scripts, publicity. And at night, she invented. Because Hedy Lamarr never stopped being curious, never stopped questioning, never stopped building. Even when the world tried to turn her into a silent image, what they saw was a star. What they missed was a scientist in disguise. Chapter 2. The secret lab behind the screen, when stardom funded science. By day, Hedy Lamarr graced the silver screen, playing exiled princesses, exotic heroines, femme fatales. But by night, behind her mansion doors, she was dismantling radios, sketching blueprints, inventing the future. Her stardom paid for her solitude. Her fame bought her freedom to think. Because even while the world applauded her beauty, she knew what they refused to see, that she was not a product, she was a problem solver. In her home laboratory, she filled notebooks with mechanical ideas, designs for traffic lights, improvements to airplane wings, and most importantly, a concept that would one day power modern communication. It was the early 1940s. World War II raged, and one problem haunted military technology. Torpedoes could be jammed, enemy signals could interfere with guidance systems, making precision weapons useless. Hedy had an idea. Inspired by the mechanics of a player piano, she imagined a communication system that could jump frequencies, sending signals on ever-changing channels to avoid interception. But she wasn't alone. She partnered with George Antheil, an avant-garde composer known for experimental rhythmic machines. Together, they invented a system of frequency hopping, where a transmitter and receiver would jump between synchronized frequencies to prevent jamming. It was brilliant, radical, completely ahead of its time. They filed a patent in 1942, patent number 2,292,387, and then the military shelved it, dismissed it, classified it. Because who was Hedy Lamarr, really? An actress? A beauty queen? Certainly not someone the Navy would take seriously. They couldn't see her mind because they were blinded by her myth. But the idea lingered. Years later, long after her patent had expired, the core concept of frequency hopping would form the foundation for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS. The world would run on her blueprint without ever knowing her name. This was the pattern of her life. Build, invent, advance the world, quietly, invisibly. Because no one thought to look behind the screen. They didn't ask what the starlet was doing with circuit diagrams. They didn't imagine the woman in designer gowns was also designing communication systems. But she was. Because brilliance doesn't ask permission, and Hedy Lamarr didn't need a lab coat to shape the technological world we live in today. Chapter 3. When History Forgot Her, the Invisible Legacy of a Visionary. After the patent was filed, after the applause faded, after the lights dimmed on her final films, Hedy Lamarr disappeared from the story. Not because she stopped working, but because history never knew where to look. While the patent sat dormant in military archives, the entertainment world moved on. She aged, and in Hollywood, aging is an exile. The scripts stopped coming, the praise cooled, the headlines changed tone. And the world, having consumed her image for decades, never once thought to ask, what else did she build? What else did she know? No awards, no royalties, no acknowledgement. The very technologies that would drive the 21st century. Digital communication, wireless networks, encrypted signals, were founded on principles she sketched in her home lab, while the world begged for her autograph. By the time engineers began recognizing the brilliance of frequency hopping, the patent had long expired. The defense industry used it freely. The private sector built fortunes on its echoes. And Hedy? She lived in obscurity, alone, misunderstood, dismissed by the very systems she quietly helped evolve. This is the deeper tragedy of her legacy, that a woman can give the world a tool it depends on and still be remembered for her face. That genius, when wrapped in beauty, is too often erased. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Hedy Lamarr became exactly who she was, an inventor, a thinker, a disruptor. But she lived in a world that only accepted her. When she played the part it had written for her, her true role, architect of innovation, was left off the marquee. It wasn't until 1997, at age 82, that she was formally recognized by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Too late, but not too little. The world had already adopted her vision, without ever thanking her for it. But the truth is this: every GPS-guided map, every wireless call, every Wi-Fi signal that connects you to the world carries a piece of Hedy Lamarr's mind. She was never just decoration, she was foundation. And foundations don't need to be seen to be essential. Chapter 4: Beauty, Brilliance, and the System That Can't Hold Both. Hedy Lamarr lived at the intersection of two worlds, glamour and genius. But the system only allowed her to be one. In Hollywood, she was adored, not for her insight, but for her symmetry, not for her patents, but for her profile. She embodied desire, and desire is rarely asked to think. In science, she was dismissed, not for lack of intelligence, but for too much beauty. She didn't look like an engineer. She didn't speak like a man, so she couldn't possibly belong. This is the double bind that Hedy Lamarr spent her life trapped in. Too beautiful to be taken seriously, too brilliant to settle for objectification. It wasn't just society's failure, it was structural. The same system that benefited from her mind refused to admit that she had one. Because if a woman can be both stunning and sharp, elegant and exacting, charming and intellectually dangerous, what does that say about the roles we assign? Hedy Lamarr broke those roles just by existing, and the world didn't know what to do with her. So it tried to split her in half. Actress over here, inventor over there. But Hedy never lived like that. She never waited for permission to be whole. She took what others saw as contradiction and made it coherence. This is what made her so threatening to the systems around her. She refused to choose between brilliance and beauty. She believed she could build torpedo-jamming tech and still walk onto a movie set in diamonds. She believed intellect didn't need to look like a lab coat, and she proved it again and again. But proof wasn't enough. Because recognition in a patriarchal structure requires more than achievement, it requires compliance, and she never complied. She didn't dim herself to fit. She didn't apologize for being more than one thing. And that's why her story matters now more than ever. In an era still obsessed with surface, still uncomfortable with feminine genius, still caught in false binaries, Hedy Lamarr stands as proof that a woman can be exactly what she is and still reshape the world, even if it takes decades for the world to notice. Chapter 5: What her legacy teaches us about visibility, voice, and vision. What remains after the applause fades, after the lights dim and the stories stop being told? In Hedy Lamarr's case, what remains is a silent infrastructure, one that powers satellites, guides missiles, connects billions of people through invisible waves. She built it, we use it, and for decades, we didn't even know her name. But her legacy is more than technological. It's philosophical. It forces us to confront how we treat female intelligence. When it doesn't come wrapped in the package we expect. Hedy's life is a mirror, showing us the cost of a culture that splits women in two, that asks them to be either muse or mind, but never both. She didn't just defy that split, she embodied its falsehood. And that is what her legacy teaches us. That real innovation doesn't look like a stereotype, that visibility doesn't equal recognition, and that power, when housed in a woman who refuses to shrink, often goes unseen until history is forced to reckon with her. She reminds us that some revolutions are quiet. They happen in notebooks, in sketches made after dinner, in patents filed by those never invited to the table. And most importantly, she teaches us that brilliance doesn't need to be acknowledged to be real. She didn't wait for credit to create. She didn't ask for applause to invent. She gave the world what it needed and let it catch up in its own time. That's vision, that's leadership, that's legacy. For every woman who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or boxed in by someone else's imagination. Hedy Lamarr is a blueprint, not because she was perfect, but because she was whole. She lived in contradiction and turned it into contribution. And long after the final film credits rolled, her real story began, the story of a mind so forward-facing, the world had to evolve just to understand what she left behind. Hedy Lamarr didn't ask for approval. She didn't wait for permission. She saw a world built to overlook her mind. And instead of begging for entry, she built things the world couldn't live without. They saw a screen goddess. She saw signal encryption. They handed her scripts. She sketched frequencies. They called her decoration. She became foundation. Her brilliance wasn't loud. It wasn't polished for headlines. It worked in silence, across labs, across time, across signal towers and satellites. And maybe that's the most powerful legacy of all. Not one that demanded recognition, but one that outlived it. Because even if the world forgot her name, it could never escape her work. Every GPS ping, every Bluetooth sync, every time you go online, you walk across the invisible architecture, built by a woman the world refused to take seriously. So let her story be more than trivia. Let it be a challenge. To see past the surfaces, to question who we elevate and who we erase, to ask ourselves how many other Hedy Lamarrs the world has missed, because they didn't look the part. And most of all, to remember that brilliance has no assigned face, no approved gender, no fixed form. It only asks one thing: to be recognized, and if not by the world, then at least by those of us awake enough to finally see